This is Rick Rule for Rule Investment Media, sponsors and producers of the Natural Resources Investment Symposium in Boca Raton, Florida, July 23rd through 27th. Today's interview is part of an ongoing CEO interview where I introduce my attendees to the CEOs of the companies that will be exhibiting at the conference. Note that every public company exhibitor at the conference is owned in the accounts of the sponsors of the conference. There's no guarantee, sadly, that because I buy a stock, the stock goes up. But there is a guarantee that we know the companies well enough, we vetted them well enough that they're in our own accounts. And the probability is, for some of you, they should be in yours. But note that ownership might denote in some aspects a conflict of interest. Today, I have the great privilege of introducing a friend of long standing, Mr. Christian Easterday, CEO of Hot Chile, an Australian domiciled copper explorer and developer whose principal assets are based in Chile. Christian, welcome to the interview and thank you for your ongoing sponsorship of the Natural Resources Investment Symposium.
Thank you, Rick. Really looking forward to getting down there with the conference again. So great to be back with you.
Let's begin by talking something about the people. Tell me what you've done that prepares yourself for the CEO role, and tell me something about the backgrounds of any of the principal members of your team. Not meant to be biographical, just so that we can believe something about what you tell us about the project.
Sure, thanks. Well, I've been a geologist and in this industry for some 25 years. Used to work in the gold sector in Australia and then internationally with Placidome, and started this company over 15 years ago with our founding chairman Murray Black. And you know, some of the key people in Hot Chile have been with this company and driving this story for over a decade. We have a very talented chairman in Dr. Nikki Adshead Bell, capital mark from your way, Rick, and recently had Dr. Stephen Quinn join our board, former president and founding director over at Capstone Mining. So a lot of experience on the board in the copper sector, over 15 years of us putting this together down in Chile, and we have nationals such as Roberto Andraca, president of Invacap and one of our partners at our project down in Chile, and more importantly, my vice president in Chile, Jose Ignacio Silva, who will be at the conference, who's been by my side and doing all of this and consolidating the coastline with me for all of this time.
So let's talk about the asset. Let's talk about the investment proposition. A fairly large and growing copper deposit, reasonably close to the coast. Tell us what you have and tell us why that's important. Make the investment case for Hot Chile.
Great. Well, look, the copper sector and large copper is all about persistence. We build these projects through the cycles to last through the cycles. And this has been over a decade in the making and de-risking, consolidating a large part of the Chile line and starting to now really gain critical mass. We have nearly 1 billion tons of resources in open pittable deposits. We've just reached a very important milestone for the project in the last day, releasing a PEA which has demonstrated very strong economics for what is a very unique sized project. We're one of a handful of projects that are in the 100,000 tonne per annum copper production space. And in a nutshell, that means projects that put out close to $1 billion revenue a year for a long life. So we have a very large asset. It's the top 6 undeveloped resource in the copper space globally, as rated by S&P. We've now demonstrated the economics, really standout economics, very important measures such as, most importantly, our marketization as a proportion of our post-tax net present value. One of the lowest valued in the sector with the most advanced asset. Was trading at about a 0.07 multiple, and generally in this space, Rick, as you would well know, multiple market cap to NPV ratio are generally the 0.2 to 0.3 mark. So I guess we have a growing asset, a significant amount of exploration upside. We have 3.4 million tonnes of contained copper in the ground in our resource base, 3 million ounces of gold. That's 82% in the measured and indicated class. And we're about to kick off a 30,000 metre program to expand our now new porphyry discovery Cordillera to well over 1 billion tonnes in our next phase of growth.
You know, Christian, most of the copper deposits that I've visited in Chile and the new deposits in Argentina are in the high Andes. Something that struck me about your deposit is its location and the infrastructure. Perhaps you could describe that.
Yeah, look, and Rick, you and I have been talking about this for a while. So, you know, when you're down at less than 1,000 meters, at about 700 meters elevation above sea level, nearly all of our peer projects and nearly the entire global copper space for development, these large projects that are going to meet this future demand that we're starting to see materializing, they're all in elevations of around 4,000 meters elevation, sort of nosebleed country, I think, is a comment you made previously. And so this is one of the lowest elevation major copper developments in the world, sitting in the middle of infrastructure on the Pan American Highway, 50 kilometers from port, next to the major substation to the Chilean national power grid. We've spent over a decade de-risking and getting all of those infrastructure pieces in place, and easement corridors, surface rights, and most importantly, 10 years securing our own water license. And I mention elevation and water in our presentation very, very prominently. And that's because they're things that translate into savings, big savings. Because of those infrastructure advantages, low elevation, license, and the ability to use salt water for processing, we've now demonstrated the lowest capital intensity major copper development in the world. And this is from a pure play copper developer. There are very few projects that can put out 100,000 tonnes of annual copper production and boast a startup of $1 billion. Most of those projects that are in our space are boasting startup capitals for that kind of production of about twice where we are. And then in terms of the operating costs, we also see significant savings there. In fact, McKinsey just predicted in 2028, high altitude desalinated water delivered into the high Andes will be running at about times the cost of salt water being delivered into low altitude into the Chilean copper mining sector. So we're really starting to see the fruits of what we've been talking about for a long time, over a decade, positioning ourselves with that infrastructure and consolidating a big part of the Chilean coastline, pulling together a 3.4 million tonne copper resource base that we hope in the next steps will move above 5 million tonnes and into the tier 1 class. Very, very rare asset.
So let's talk about progressing this deposit. Let's talk about what happens in the near term, which is to say the 12 or 18 month time frame, either in terms of de-risking the project or moving the project along. What can investors look forward to in terms of seeing the value as opposed necessarily to the price of hot chili increase?
Great. Well, look, we're really focused on our next steps in capturing in parallel with how we progress this towards a financing decision. As you know, Rick, when you look at a market capitalization of around 100 and a company is talking about building a US $1 billion project, you need to plot your next steps well on financing accretion. We've completed our pre-feasibility. We've demonstrated a very, very robust project that is certainly investable now and beating most of our peers on several metrics that we've just discussed. Capital intensity being probably the most prominent metric we're leading the pack on. But over the next 18 months, it's as much about what value you're going to deliver as what risk you're going to avoid. And I say that in the fact that we've just announced a partnership and a significant investment by Osisko Gold Royalties of 15 million US that is funding the next 12 to 18 months on the project. 30,000 metre program, which will kick off on all of our expansion targets and some of our regional exploration targets that have been driven by Dr. Steve Garwin and our very talented exploration team. So that is fully funded. And most importantly, we have a pre-feasibility that will be coming out. 80% of the workload has already been, which means that we can really focus on the growth of this project over the next 12 to 18 months. We'll be delivering a resource upgrade in the next 6 months, followed by a pre-feasibility next year, and then moving into our final phase of investment. We'll be submitting our EIA to build this mine next year and delivering our our definitive feasibility into 2028 and being positioned for finance. So I guess what we've started to do now is started to utilize our optionality in funding. And it's something that we talked about a year ago, Rick. We didn't pull the trigger early on streaming. We believe that has a huge amount of value for us. We'll be holding that in our back pocket for a little closer to the financing decision. We have Glencore as a 9.9% shareholder, and 6 months later we signed them up for offtake. But really importantly, that was only for 60% of our offtake on the first 8 years of this project. So that has left us with significant offtake to be able to negotiate. And I think that the project, when you have a project that can put out that kind of metal production with a 3.5-year payback, undoubtedly we will be sitting in a position when we get to finance that no doubt the project will be able to hold a lot of debt leverage on the financing. So ultimately what we're doing is we're focusing on ensuring that any equity component in building this mine is reduced as much as we can, and as much growth and upscaling and de-risking can be driven across that timetable. So what's really exciting about that is that makes Costa Fuego one of the first 100,000 tonne copper projects outside of the majors to hit the market this decade on that current timetable. And we can only do that because of all of the de-risking on our permitting advance for a decade.
That, of course, assumes that it doesn't become part of a major before then. But let's move on from that. We like to offer our attendees a curated experience with companies. We don't want them just to file through the company filings with the regulators. We want a living human being at the company that we can direct our attendees to, both in the one-on-one meetings and hopefully before the conference, so they can be fully apprised of Hot Chile before they get to the conference. Who at Hot Chile might our attendees contact to learn more about the company in anticipation of the conference or after the conference?
That would definitely be me, Rick, and I'll be there on the booth and putting in the time. So really looking forward to getting a lot of your investors and people across the story and giving them a personal insight into what it takes to build a large copper project over a couple of decades.
And assuming that our attendees wanted to contact you before or after the conference, how might they do that?
Look, they can contact me through our website, www.hotchile.net.au, and certainly I'm very responsive to our shareholders. We have a lot of shareholders in North America now, a growing investor base, and we're very attentive to answering any questions. So thank you, Rick.
Christian, thank you for subjecting yourself to this interview, and thank you, too, for your ongoing support of the Natural Resource Investment Symposiums. It has been a pleasure talking to you. It will be a pleasure hosting you in Boca Raton, Florida.
Thank you, Rick. Looking forward to it.